When a ruthless billionaire buys a desperate single mother at an elite auction, it's just a business deal, a contract to bear his child. But when hidden pasts collide, a shocking truth is revealed. Her son is actually his lost heir. A tale of passion, betrayal, and an unforgettable love begins. The cold December wind howled through the dimly lit streets of Istanbul, where Noor clutched her son, Ayhan, in her arms. His frail body shivered as he coughed against her shoulder. She pulled her worn-out shawl tighter around them, trying to shield him from the cruel winter. "Ami, I'm tired," Ayhan whispered, his voice barely audible. His pale face, marked by the signs of illness, pierced Noor's heart like a dagger. She swallowed the lump in her throat and forced a smile. "Just a little longer, my Jan. Mama will find a way. I promise." Noor had always been a fighter. Left alone by a cruel husband who abandoned her with a sick child and piles of debt, she had worked endlessly, cleaning houses, sewing clothes, anything to keep her son alive. But tonight, she had no options left. Ayhan needed urgent surgery, and every door had been slammed in her face. Except one. A dark, forbidden option that sent chills down her spine. A sleek black Rolls-Royce Phantom pulled up in front of the grand, heavily guarded underground auction house. This was no ordinary auction. It was a place where the wealthiest men in the world bid on companionship, surrogacy, and contractual marriages. Noor had heard whispers of this world before, but she never imagined stepping into it herself. Yet, fate had left her with no choice. Her heart pounded as she stepped inside. Gold chandeliers illuminated the extravagant hall where powerful men in custom-tailored suits sipped whiskey, their sharp eyes scanning the women on display. She felt her soul burn with humiliation, but she clenched her fists, remembering why she was here. For Ayhan. For his life. The billionaire with the coldest eyes. In the VIP section, Sheikh Rami Al-Saif sat like a king on his throne. Tall, broad-shouldered, and devastatingly handsome, he exuded power. Yet his eyes were as cold as ice, ruthless, untouchable. He wasn't here for pleasure. He was here for a deal. His empire was worth billions, but according to his grandfather's strict will, he had to produce an heir within a year to inherit his full fortune. Rami despised women. He had been betrayed once before and vowed never to love again. But he needed an heir, a contract wife, nothing more. His jaw tightened as the auctioneer's voice echoed through the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, our next offering is rare indeed. A beautiful, untouched widow, willing to commit to any arrangement for the right price." Noor's knees trembled as she was led onto the stage. The spotlight blinded her, but she kept her chin high. She wouldn't break, not in front of them. A murmur spread across the crowd. She was different from the usual women here. Innocent, dignified, a fighter. Then the bidding began. The highest bid that changed. Everything men started raising their paddles. $100,000. $200,000. $500,000. Noor felt bile rise in her throat. Was this what her worth had been reduced to? $1 million! The room fell silent. Every head turned toward the VIP section where Sheikh Rami Al-Saif sat, his fingers drumming against the armrest of his chair. His obsidian eyes locked onto Noor's trembling form. He could see the desperation in her eyes, the way she clutched at her dress. And something inside him stirred, something unfamiliar. He hadn't planned to bid, but now he couldn't stop himself. $2 million, a man in the front row countered, a smirk playing on his lips. Rami's jaw tightened. He didn't like competition, and he certainly didn't like the way that man was looking at her. $10 million, gasps filled the room. The other bidders sank back into their seats, knowing better than to challenge the billionaire Arab who never lost. The gavel came down. Sold to Sheikh Rami Al-Saif. Noor's breath hitched. It was over. She belonged to him now. A deal with the devil. Backstage, Noor's hands shook as she was escorted into a private suite where Rami stood, his tall frame towering over her. "Sit," he commanded. His deep voice was smooth yet deadly. Noor hesitated, but her legs felt weak. She lowered herself onto the velvet chair, staring at the contract he placed before her. "You will be my wife for 1 year. In return, I will clear all your debts and ensure your son receives the best medical care. After 1 year, we part ways. No emotional involvement, no complications, just a contract." Her throat felt dry. "And if I refuse?" His dark eyes met hers. "Then your son dies." A sharp pain tore through her chest. This man was heartless, a devil wrapped in perfection. Tears stung her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She picked up the pen with trembling fingers. "Fine," she whispered, "but don't expect me to love you." A smirk ghosted his lips. "Good, because love is not part of the deal." As she signed her name, she felt the chains of fate tightening around her. Noor thought she was selling herself to save her son, but what she didn't know was that she had just sold her heart to the most dangerous man alive. Noor stood in the grand private suite of a 7-star hotel, staring at her reflection in the mirror. The delicate gold-embroidered gown hugged her body, its luxurious fabric feeling foreign against her skin. A heavy diamond necklace rested around her neck, a symbol of the deal she had made with the devil. Her heart pounded as the reality sank in. She was now the wife of Sheikh Rami Al-Saif. Not out of love, not out of choice, but out of desperation. The wedding had been quick and private, just as Rami had planned. No guests, no family, no emotions. A mere signature on the marriage certificate was all it took to bind her to a man she barely knew. The door behind her creaked open, and her body stiffened as she caught sight of her new husband in the mirror. Rami stepped inside, dressed in an impeccably tailored black tuxedo, his broad shoulders radiating dominance. "You're my wife now," he stated, his voice as cold as ever. "But don't mistake this for a real marriage." Noor turned, her eyes flashing with anger and defiance. "Trust me, Sheikh." "I wouldn't dream of it." A smirk played at the corner of his lips, as if he enjoyed seeing her fight back. "Good, because this is a business transaction. Nothing more." He moved closer, his intense gaze burning into hers. "From this moment on, you will live in my world, follow my rules, and play the role of my wife in public. In return, your son will have everything he needs." Noor swallowed hard. Aryan, he was the only reason she was doing this. But that didn't mean she would bow down to Rami's arrogance. "If you expect me to be an obedient doll, you're mistaken," she said, her voice firm. "I will be your wife in name, but I will never be yours." Something flickered in Rami's eyes, something dark, something dangerous. But instead of arguing, he merely smirked. "Time will tell," he murmured, before turning away. "Pack your things. We're leaving for Dubai tonight." Noor exhaled sharply, her hands curling into fists. Sheikh Rami Al-Saif may have bought her, but he would never own her heart. The private jet landed smoothly on the exclusive runway of Al-Saif Palace, a breathtaking estate located on the outskirts of Dubai. Noor gazed out the window, her breath catching in her throat. It was unlike anything she had ever seen before. A sprawling mansion surrounded by gardens, fountains, and a private beach. The palace itself was built with ivory marble, its golden domes glistening under the Arabian sun. As they stepped off the jet, Noor felt overwhelmed by the grandness of it all. "Welcome home, Mrs. Al-Saif," Rami said, his voice carrying a hint of amusement. "This isn't my home," she muttered under her breath. Before she could take another step, a warm voice called out, "Rami." Noor turned to see a beautiful elderly woman rushing toward them. Her silk dress and elegant jewels spoke of royalty, but her eyes were filled with kindness. "My son, you didn't even tell me you were bringing your bride home. the woman scolded gently, hugging Rami before turning to Noor. This is my mother, Queen Yasmin Al-Saif, Rami introduced, his tone noticeably softer. Noor felt a wave of relief. At least someone here had a heart. My dear, you are even more beautiful in person. Yasmin took Noor's hands, squeezing them warmly. You must be tired. Come, let me show you around. Rami's stepbrother Tariq stood nearby, his arms crossed. His sharp gaze travelled over Noor with suspicion. I find it strange that my dear brother suddenly decided to get married, Tariq said, his voice laced with sarcasm, and to a woman we know nothing about. Rami's expression turned deadly in an instant. You don't need to know anything about her, he snapped. She is my wife, and that is all that matters. Noor's stomach twisted. It was clear that not everyone in this household accepted her, and she had a feeling the worst was yet to come. Later that evening, Aryan arrived at the palace. Noor rushed to the car, her heart pounding with excitement and fear. She had missed her son terribly, and this was the moment she had been waiting for. The second the door opened, Aryan leapt into her arms. Ami! He squealed, hugging her tightly. Tears of relief and love filled Noor's eyes as she held him close, inhaling his familiar scent. Her world. Her reason for breathing. She pulled back slightly, cupping his face. My Jan, are you okay? Did they treat you well? Ayan nodded, his little fingers clutching her dress. The plane was so big, and they gave me chocolates. A chuckle escaped Noor's lips despite everything. You and chocolates. But before she could revel in their reunion, she felt a burning gaze on her. She turned to find Rami watching them, his expression unreadable. For the first time, something flickered in his cold obsidian eyes, something that almost looked like regret. Noor didn't know why, and she didn't care. All that mattered was Aryan. But little did she know, this was just the beginning. Noor held him close, tears welling in her eyes. Oh, my Jan, I missed you so much. Aryan's bright eyes suddenly flickered toward Rami, who stood a few feet away watching the scene silently. Who is he? Aryan whispered, his small hand gripping Noor's dress. Noor took a deep breath. This was it. Aryan, this is Sheikh Rami. He's my husband. Aryan's eyes widened. So, does that mean he's my new Abu? Noor's throat tightened. Before she could answer, Rami crouched down, leveling himself with the boy. There was something in his expression. Hesitation, uncertainty, maybe even vulnerability. You can call me Rami, he said, his voice softer than Noor had ever heard before. Aryan studied him for a moment before asking innocently, Are you nice? Rami blinked, caught off guard. He wasn't used to children, especially ones who looked at him with such pure trust. Noor held her breath, waiting for his response. Finally, Rami sighed. I don't know, he admitted, but I will try to be. Aryan's small lips curved into a smile. Okay. He suddenly wrapped his arms around Rami's neck in a quick, spontaneous hug. Rami stiffened. Noor's heart stopped. Everyone in the room froze. And in that moment, something inside Rami shifted. This child, this small, innocent boy, had just done something no one else ever had. He had touched the untouchable Sheikh. That night, Noor sat alone on the balcony, staring at the ocean. The sound of the waves was soothing, but her heart was in turmoil. She had expected this marriage to be cold, unfeeling, unbearable. But now, something was changing. She had seen it in Rami's eyes. The way he had looked at Aryan. The hesitation, the confusion, the silent longing. Could there be more to this man than his ruthless exterior? Before she could think further, she heard the sound of footsteps approaching. Rami. His presence was overpowering, his scent, a mix of expensive oud and masculinity, filling the air. You're thinking too much, he said, and you're feeling too little, she shot back. He smirked, stepping closer. Be careful, Noor. You might start falling for me. She turned to face him, her chin lifting defiantly. Never. But, as Rami gazed into her eyes, something flickered in his expression, and for the first time, she wasn't sure if she believed her own words. The golden sun dipped below the Dubai skyline, casting a warm amber glow over the vast Al-Saif palace. Noor stood at the window of her lavish suite, staring out at the breathtaking city below. Everything about this place screamed luxury, power, wealth, but for Noor, it felt like a golden cage. A marriage without love, a contract, a business deal. That's all this was. Yet, the moment she had seen Rami with Ayan, something inside her had wavered. She had expected the sheikh to be detached and indifferent toward her son. Instead, she had seen a flicker of something she couldn't quite understand. Something almost human. But she refused to be fooled by it. This man was dangerous. Not because he was cruel, but because he was unreadable. Because he made her heart betray her. And she would not let that happen. Not after what she had been through. Noor wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and stepped out onto the balcony, inhaling the crisp evening air. You're restless, she startled at the deep voice behind her. She turned to see Rami, leaning against the doorway, his powerful arms crossed over his chest. Dressed in a crisp white shirt with the top buttons undone, revealing a hint of his tanned skin, he looked infuriatingly handsome. Maybe I just don't like feeling trapped, Noor shot back, narrowing her eyes. Rami smirked. You're not a prisoner, Noor. She raised an eyebrow. Aren't I? You bought me, didn't you? Rami's expression darkened. He stepped closer, his presence overpowering. I saved you. Noor's heart pounded at his closeness, but she refused to look away. No, you bought me. There's a difference. A tense silence stretched between them. Then, to her surprise, Rami chuckled softly. You have fire, Noor, he mused, tilting his head. Most women in your position would be grateful. I'm not most women, she whispered. He lifted his hand as if to touch her face, but stopped himself at the last second, his jaw tightening. For a moment, his dark eyes softened, as if he wanted to say something real. But then, just as quickly, the ice returned. Get some rest, he said coolly, stepping back. We have an event to attend tomorrow. Noor swallowed hard as she watched him walk away, her heart a tangled mess of emotions. This man was a mystery, and she hated how much she wanted to solve him. The next morning, Noor walked into the grand palace garden, where Ayan was playing near the fountain. She stopped mid-step. Rami was sitting on a stone bench, watching Ayan carefully as the little boy excitedly showed him a toy car. I painted it myself, Uncle Rami. See? Noor's breath hitched. Uncle Rami? She expected the billionaire to brush him off, but instead, Rami studied the toy with genuine interest. You like cars? He asked, his tone different. Ayan nodded enthusiastically. Yes. But Mama can't afford new ones, so I fix my old ones. Noor's heart twisted. Rami was silent for a moment. Then he murmured, almost to himself, a fighter, just like her. Before Noor could process his words, Ayan grabbed Rami's hand. Do you like cars too, Uncle Rami? Noor expected Rami to pull away, but instead, the sheikh nodded slowly. I do, he admitted. I have a whole collection. Ayan's eyes widened. Really? Can I see them one day? Rami hesitated. His walls were cracking. Noor could see it. He was unsure, unfamiliar with kindness, with innocence. Finally, he nodded. One day. Ayan grinned and ran back to his toys. Noor swallowed past the lump in her throat. Who was this man? And why did she feel like she was seeing a side of him no one else had? That evening, Noor and Rami attended an elite gala where the world's most powerful businessmen had gathered. Rami's hand rested lightly on the small of her back as they entered, sending an unexpected shiver down her spine. Smile, he murmured. Remember you're my wife. She forced a smile as cameras flashed, capturing the billionaire and his stunning new bride. Yet, despite the facade, Noor couldn't shake the feeling that Rami wasn't just pretending anymore. Inside the ballroom, Noor was a vision, dressed in a breathtaking red gown that hugged her curves perfectly, her dark hair cascading over her shoulders. Men stared. Rami noticed, his jaw clenched as his grip on her waist tightened possessively. "Stay close," he ordered, his voice laced with something she couldn't quite place. Jealousy? Later that night, as they returned to the palace, Noor finally confronted him. "You don't like other men looking at me, do you?" she teased, stepping closer. Rami exhaled sharply, loosening his tie. "You're imagining things." Noor arched an eyebrow. "Am I?" For the first time, she saw something flicker in his eyes. Something raw, dangerous, wanting. And then he snapped. In one swift move, he had her pinned against the wall, his hands on either side of her, trapping her in the most intoxicating way. Her breath hitched. His lips were just inches away from hers. "You drive me insane," he growled, his voice thick with something dark and unspoken. Her heart thundered against her ribs. "Then let me go." His hand brushed against her jaw, tracing the curve of her cheek. "I can't," he admitted in a rare, hushed whisper. The world stilled. The air crackled between them. Noor's body betrayed her, her lips parting slightly, her eyes flickering to his mouth. For a fleeting moment she thought he might kiss her, but just as quickly as it happened he pulled away, his expression unreadable. "This is a mistake," he muttered, stepping back. Noor hated the cold distance that suddenly returned between them, and she hated herself even more for wanting him to stay. The vast, luxurious halls of Al-Saif Palace had always been silent. It was a place of power, wealth, and loneliness. But tonight, something was different. Laughter, pure, innocent laughter, echoed through the grand living room. Noor paused in the hallway, peeking inside. What she saw stole her breath away. Ayan and Rami. Sitting on the expensive Persian rug, Ayan was building a model car, his tiny fingers fumbling with the pieces. And next to him, in a sight Noor never imagined possible, Sheikh Rami Al-Saif was sitting cross-legged, carefully helping the boy put it together. Her heart clenched. Rami had never shown this side before. He was always cold, ruthless, untouchable. But now, sitting there with her son, a small, genuine smile played on his lips. He looked human. Noor stepped forward, watching the two of them. "You're really good at this, Uncle Rami," Ayan chirped, his voice filled with admiration. Rami smirked. "It's nothing special, kid. I grew up fixing cars. Real ones." Ayan's eyes widened. "Really? Then you can help me build my car collection." Rami's expression softened in a way Noor had never seen before. Ayan's tiny hands reached for Rami's much larger ones, his small fingers curling around the billionaire's wrist. "Can I ask you something, Uncle Rami?" Ayan whispered. Rami hesitated. "What is it?" Ayan's gaze was pure, trusting, filled with longing. "Can I call you Baba?" Silence. Noor's breath hitched. Rami froze completely, his body stiffening. For the first time in his life, Sheikh Rami Al-Saif, the man feared by the business world, was speechless. His lips parted, but no words came out. Ayan, oblivious to the impact of his words, continued in a hopeful voice. "I never had a real Baba, but now Mama is your wife, so maybe—" His tiny voice trailed off, his innocent request hanging in the air like a fragile thread. Noor's heart ached for her son. She knew what it was like to long for love, to wish for something you were never given. And then, to her utter shock, Rami slowly exhaled and placed a hand on Ayan's head. "You can call me whatever you want," he said, his voice low and strained. Ayan beamed. Noor, standing there with tears in her eyes, knew something irreversible had just happened. Sheikh Rami Al-Saif was falling, not just for Ayan, but for her. Later that night, Noor found Rami standing alone in the dimly lit study, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He didn't look at her as she entered. "You shouldn't drink so much," she said softly. Rami scoffed, swirling the amber liquid. "Some things are easier to forget when you're drunk." She stepped closer. "Like what?" His grip on the glass tightened. "Like the fact that I swore I would never get attached again." Her heart pounded. "What happened to you, Rami?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. He turned then, his dark eyes glazed with something raw and broken. "You really want to know?" His voice was bitter. "Fine." He downed the rest of his drink and placed the glass on the desk with a soft thud. "I once loved someone," he admitted. "I trusted her, gave her everything, and she betrayed me in the worst way possible." Noor stilled. "She stole my child," he said, his voice hollow. "Vanished. And when I finally found her again, my son was gone, buried in a grave I never even got to see." A sharp pain pierced Noor's heart. Rami's child had died. She couldn't speak, couldn't move. The anguish in his eyes was unbearable. Noor took a hesitant step closer. "Rami, I'm so sorry." He let out a harsh laugh, shaking his head. "I learned my lesson. Love is a lie. Trust is a weakness. That's why I made this contract with you, Noor. I don't do emotions. I don't do family. This is temporary." Noor swallowed the lump in her throat, but deep down she knew the truth. Rami wasn't as heartless as he claimed. He was just afraid. That night, Noor lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. She couldn't stop thinking about him, his pain, his past, the way he had let Ayan into his heart, even when he was terrified of love. Her fingers curled into the sheets as she whispered to herself, "What are you doing to me, Rami?" Before she could dwell on it any further, the bedroom door creaked open. She gasped, her pulse skyrocketing. Rami stood in the doorway, his tall frame illuminated by the moonlight. For a long moment he just stared at her. Then, in a move that stole the breath from her lungs, he stepped inside, closing the door behind him. Noor's heart pounded. "Rami?" His dark eyes burned into hers, full of something dangerous, something unspoken. "I don't want to be alone tonight," he admitted, his voice rough. Noor's breath caught, because deep down she didn't want to be alone either. Not tonight. Not with him. And as he stepped closer, their worlds collided in a way that neither of them could stop. The soft glow of the moon cast silver shadows across the luxurious master bedroom. Noor's heart raced as she watched Rami step closer, his dark eyes clouded with something intense, dangerous, unspoken. He had never entered her room before. Their agreement was clear, no emotions, no intimacy, just a contract marriage. But tonight, something was different. Noor sat frozen, clutching the silky sheets, her pulse hammering in her ears. "I don't want to be alone tonight," Rami had said. And yet, there was something in his voice, something vulnerable, something raw. For the first time, he wasn't the ruthless billionaire. He wasn't the untouchable sheikh. He was just a man running from his own demons. "Rami," Noor whispered, standing up, her bare feet sinking into the plush carpet. He watched her, his eyes burning into hers, searching for something. Maybe permission, maybe an answer to a question he hadn't even asked. Then, in one swift motion, he was in front of her, his hands gripping her waist. Fire. Their breaths mingled, the space between them vanishing. Rami's fingers tightened on her waist as if he was battling an internal war. Noor's pulse thundered in her ears. This wasn't supposed to happen. This wasn't part of the contract. And yet in that moment nothing else mattered, because the walls between them were finally beginning to crumble. That's what it felt like, a wildfire threatening to consume them both. Noor gasped as his touch sent a jolt through her body. "This shouldn't be happening," she whispered. "I know," Rami murmured, his voice thick with something undeniable, but neither of them moved away. Instead, Rami reached up, his fingers brushing a loose strand of her dark hair away from her face. His touch was gentle, almost reverent. "You drive me insane," he admitted, his forehead pressing lightly against hers. "From the moment I saw you, I told myself you were just a deal, just a contract." Noor's breath hitched as his fingers traced her jawline. "But you're not, Noor," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "You never were." The air crackled between them. Their worlds stood still. Then, as if something inside him finally snapped, Rami tilted her chin up and crashed his lips against hers. A kiss that changed everything. It wasn't soft. It wasn't careful. It was desperate, consuming, unstoppable. Noor's hands found his shirt, gripping the fabric as he deepened the kiss, his arms wrapping around her, pulling her flush against him. The kiss was a war of emotions: anger, passion, longing, fear. A battle neither of them was ready to lose. Rami lifted her effortlessly, pressing her against the cool wall, his lips trailing from her mouth to her jaw, to her neck, to her collarbone. Noor shuddered. "Rami." He exhaled against her skin. "Tell me to stop," he whispered. Noor couldn't, because she didn't want him to. The next morning, Noor woke up alone. The bed beside her was cold. For a second, she thought last night had been a dream, but the lingering warmth on her lips, the way her body still trembled from his touch, it was all real. And yet he was gone. Her heart twisted as she threw on a silk robe and stepped outside. She found him on the balcony, his back to her, dressed in a crisp white shirt and slacks, staring at the Dubai skyline. "Rami," she whispered. He turned slowly, his expression unreadable. Last night he had looked at her like she was his entire world. But now he looked at her like she was a mistake. Her chest tightened. "Are you just going to pretend it didn't happen?" He exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand over his jaw. "It shouldn't have happened." Noor's stomach dropped. "You regret it?" she asked, her voice softer than she intended. Rami's jaw clenched. "I told you before, I don't do love, I don't do emotions." Her heart ached. "So, what was last night then? A weakness?" "Yes," he said, his voice clipped. "It was a mistake." Noor felt something inside her shatter. She had known what kind of man he was. She had known. And yet, she had allowed herself to fall anyway. Foolish. She straightened her shoulders, hiding the pain beneath an icy mask. "Fine," she said, forcing a cold smile. "Then let's go back to the deal. Just a contract, right?" Rami's eyes flickered with something unreadable, something almost like regret. But before he could say anything, Ayan's voice broke the silence. "Good morning, Mama." "Good morning, Baba." Noor froze. "Baba?" Her eyes snapped to Rami's, searching his expression. His body tensed, his mask slipping for a fraction of a second. Then, to her utter shock, he bent down, ruffling Ayan's hair. "Good morning, kid," he murmured, his voice soft, affectionate. Noor's heart clenched. Rami refused to love her, but he was already falling for her son. And maybe, just maybe, that was the most dangerous thing of all. Days passed and things changed, but not in the way Noor had hoped. Ever since that night of passion, Rami had distanced himself again. He avoided her during the day, left for work early, and barely spoke to her at dinner. But at night, she could feel him, standing outside her door, watching her when he thought she wasn't looking. Noor was losing herself in him, and she hated it, because even when Rami refused to acknowledge what had happened between them, his actions betrayed him. And the way he was with Ayan? That was something Noor never expected. Rami Al-Saif, the man who claimed he didn't do love, was slowly becoming a father to her son. But fate had other plans. Because just when Noor thought she was beginning to understand the man she had married, a truth would be revealed that would change everything. It started with a single document. Noor had gone to the study to find a book for iron, but as she searched the shelves, a piece of paper fell onto the floor. Frowning, she picked it up, and what she saw made her blood run cold. It was a DNA test result. The names on it? Rami Al-Saif, Ayan Mirza, her son's name. Her hands trembled as she scanned the document. 99.9% paternal match. No, this wasn't possible. She felt like the air had been sucked from her lungs. This had to be a mistake. Rami was Ayan's biological father? Her fingers clenched around the paper as her entire world spun. This couldn't be real. Unless. Her past was a lie. Noor staggered back, her chest rising and falling rapidly. Memories came rushing back like a storm. She had met her ex-husband, Zayn, when she was young, naive, and desperate for love. He had charmed her, trapped her, broken her. And when she had fallen pregnant, she had thought, just for a moment, that he had changed. But what if Ayan wasn't Zayn's son at all? Her hands trembled as she clutched the DNA report. Had Zayn stolen Rami's child? A gasp left her lips. Was that why Zayn had been so possessive? Why he had refused to let her ever leave his side? Did he know? Had she been raising Rami's son all along, without even knowing it? The roar of an engine outside made her snap out of her thoughts. Rami was home, and he was about to find out the truth Noor had just uncovered. Noor stormed into the grand living room where Rami was removing his jacket. The second he saw her wild expression, his brows furrowed. "Something wrong?" he asked, pouring himself a drink. Her hands shook as she held up the DNA results. "What is this, Rami?" His entire body went still. His eyes flickered to the paper, then back to her. "Where did you get that?" "Answer me!" Noor's voice cracked, her emotions spiraling out of control. He exhaled slowly, placing his glass down. "I had a test done," he admitted. Noor felt her heart crack. "And you didn't think to tell me," she whispered, her voice breaking, Rami's jaw clenched. "I needed to be sure first." Noor laughed bitterly, but there was nothing funny about this. "You needed to be sure? So what? You just took my son's DNA without telling me?" Rami's eyes flashed dangerously. "Our son, Noor," she froze. His words hit her like a thunderbolt. He took a slow, measured step forward, his gaze unrelenting. "Ayan is my son," he repeated, voice low, deep, and full of raw emotion. Noor shook her head. That's not possible. I was married to Zayn when I got pregnant. It doesn't make sense." "Did you ever question why Zayn never let you leave? Why he controlled you?" Rami snapped. "Because he knew Noor. He knew Ayan wasn't his." Noor felt her knees buckle. She grabbed onto the couch for support, her breath coming in quick, sharp gasps. Her past had been a lie. Her entire life had been a lie. Rami's eyes burned into hers, his mask cracking. "I lost a son once, Noor," he murmured. "And now I find out that my son, my real son, was in front of me this whole time." Noor couldn't speak. The pain in his voice was too much. The weight of the truth was too much. And then, Rami whispered the words that shattered her completely. "I'm not letting him go again." Noor's breath hitched. What does that mean?" Rami's expression turned unreadable. "It means things are about to change." That night, Noor sat in Ayan's room watching him sleep. Her mind was in chaos. Rami wanted to keep Ayan. Would he take her son away from her? No, she wouldn't let that happen. But when she thought of Rami's pain, his love, his silent suffering, something inside her cracked. He had already lost one child. How could she take away another? Tears slipped down her cheeks as she whispered into the night, "What do I do?" Little did she know, in the room next door, Rami stood in the dark, his hands clenched into fists. And for the first time in years, Sheikh Rami Al-Saif felt completely, utterly powerless. The palace halls felt colder than ever. Noor sat in her room staring blankly at the floor, her heart waging a war against itself. She had spent years protecting Ayan, fighting for him, sacrificing everything for his happiness. And now? Now she had just discovered that her own son wasn't truly hers. He was Rami's. Her fingers trembled as she clutched the DNA test Rami had given her that morning. She had double-checked it, triple-checked it, but the truth remained the same. Ayan was Rami's biological son, not Zayan's, not the man she had thought she married. She squeezed her eyes shut, taking a shaky breath. What do I do? If she stayed, she risked losing herself to Rami, to his dominance, his control, his love. But if she left, would she be able to take Ayan with her? Her heart clenched. Would Rami ever let her go? A knock at the door startled her. She turned and there he was. Sheikh Rami Al-Saif, her husband, her enemy, her greatest temptation. He stood tall, his piercing eyes locked onto her, his presence filling the entire room. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes burned with a mix of frustration, desperation, and something else. Something that terrified her. Love. Rami stepped forward, his voice low and controlled, but thick with emotion. We need to talk, he said, his gaze dark and unwavering. Noor swallowed hard but nodded. She sat on the edge of the bed, bracing herself for what was coming. Rami took a deep breath before speaking. I know this is overwhelming, he said, his voice quieter than before. I know you're hurting. Noor clenched her fists. Hurting, she echoed, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. Rami, my entire life was a lie. My ex-husband stole my child, made me believe he was mine. And now suddenly you're telling me that Ayan belongs to you. Pain flickered in Rami's eyes, but he didn't look away. I'm not telling you, Noor. I'm showing you the truth. Noor's breath caught. She could see it in him, the way he looked at Ayan, the way his entire body softened whenever the boy was around. And she knew deep down, he wasn't lying. Ayan was his son, and Rami would never let him go. Her heart pounded as she whispered, What now? Rami exhaled. You have a choice, he said carefully. You can leave. I won't stop you. Noor's stomach dropped. But Ayan stays with me. Her world shattered. Her pulse pounded in her ears, her vision blurring. You're keeping him? She choked out, her voice barely above a whisper. Rami's jaw tightened, but there was pain in his eyes. I lost one child, Noor, he said, his voice shaking slightly. I won't lose another. Tears burned in Noor's eyes. If I leave, you'll take him from me, she whispered, her voice cracking. Rami was silent for a moment. Then he said the most heartbreaking words she had ever heard. I have to. A sob escaped her lips. Her body felt numb, her heart splitting in two. This man she had fought against for so long, he was breaking her without even realizing it. Because deep down she wasn't just afraid of losing Ayan, she was afraid of losing Rami too. And that terrified her more than anything. That night, Noor sat by Ayan's bedside, watching him sleep peacefully. Her mind was spinning. She had a choice that no mother should ever have to make. Leave and lose the man she never meant to love. Stay and risk giving her heart to someone who could destroy it completely. As she brushed her fingers through Ayan's hair, a silent tear rolled down her cheek, and she knew. She knew what she had to do. The next morning, Rami sat in his private office, his hands clenched into fists. She would leave. He had seen it in her eyes. She had spent her whole life running, from pain, from betrayal, from love. He had finally let himself feel again, and now he was about to lose her. But then the door burst open, and Noor was standing there, her chest rising and falling rapidly, her eyes shining with determination. Rami stood up immediately, his heart pounding. You're still here, he said, his voice raw. Noor swallowed hard, stepping forward. I can't leave Ayan, she whispered. Rami's throat tightened. I know. Her breath hitched. But I also, she hesitated, then whispered, I can't leave you either. Rami's world stopped. His entire body froze, his mind struggling to process her words. Noor took another step, her eyes glistening with emotion. I don't know how it happened, she admitted. I don't even know when. But somehow, in the middle of all this chaos, She bit her lip, looking away for a brief second before meeting his gaze. I fell in love with you. Rami's chest tightened painfully. For the first time in years, he felt something he had long believed was impossible. Hope. Noor took a shaky breath. I don't want a contract anymore, Rami. I don't want a deal. I want this to be real. Rami felt his heart pound violently against his ribs. This woman had broken down every wall he had ever built. And now she was offering him everything. Love, family, forever. A deep emotion he had buried long ago rose to the surface. He stepped closer, his hand cupping her face, his thumb brushing away a single tear. Say it again, he whispered. Noor swallowed. I love you. Rami exhaled sharply. Then, before she could say another word, he kissed her, desperate, deep, unrestrained. And in that moment he knew. He had finally found his home. The moon hung high over the vast Arabian desert, casting a soft, ethereal glow over the golden sands. The cool breeze whispered through the dunes, carrying secrets of the past and whispers of the future. Noor stood at the edge of the private desert oasis, wrapped in a breathtaking emerald green gown that shimmered under the stars. Rami had asked her to meet him here, but he had given her no explanation. Her heart pounded as she stared at the mesmerizing setup before her. A long pathway of lanterns led to an intimate, candlelit setting. A majestic silk tent, its drapes billowing softly in the wind. Inside, plush velvet cushions, golden plates, and roses scattered over silk sheets gave the space an otherworldly magic. And there, standing in the middle of it all, was him, Sheikh Rami Al-Saif. Dressed in a traditional black kandura, with his dark eyes locked onto hers, he looked powerful, untouchable, yet completely hers. Her heart fluttered wildly in her chest. This man, who once saw love as a weakness, had called her here for something special, and she already knew what it was. Rami took slow, deliberate steps toward her. His gaze held no arrogance, no control, no walls. Tonight, he was simply a man in love. When he finally stood before her, he reached out without hesitation and took her hand in his. The warmth of his touch sent a shiver down her spine. Noor, he murmured, his deep voice raw with emotion. She swallowed hard. Yes. He took a deep breath, as if gathering all his strength. Then, to her utter shock, Sheikh Rami Al-Saif, the ruthless billionaire, the man feared by the business world, dropped to one knee. Noor's breath caught. Her hands flew to her mouth, her heart pounding so violently she thought she might collapse. He looked up at her, his expression unmistakably vulnerable. I never thought I would love again, he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. I never thought I deserved it. Noor's eyes burned with unshed tears. But you changed everything. His fingers tightened around hers as if afraid to let go. You showed me that love isn't a weakness, he continued. That family isn't something to fear, that the scars of the past don't have to define the future. A single tear slipped down Noor's cheek. Rami lifted his hand, gently brushing it away, his touch lingering against her skin. You are the strongest, most beautiful woman I have ever known, he whispered. And I love you, Noor. Her entire world stilled. She had waited so long to hear those words. And now they were real. Rami reached into his pocket, pulling out a diamond ring unlike anything she had ever seen. It was not just any ring. The center stone was emerald, matching the exact color of her eyes. A deep sob escaped her lips. Marry me, he whispered. For real. Not as a contract. Not as a deal. His voice broke slightly as he continued. Marry me because you love me. Because I love you. Because I can't spend another second of my life without you. Noor let out a choked laugh, tears spilling freely down her cheeks. Yes, she whispered, her voice shaking with happiness. Rami exhaled sharply, his own eyes glistening with emotion. He slid the ring onto her finger, and before she could even breathe, he stood, cupped her face and kissed her with all the passion and love he had held back for so long. It was a kiss that spoke of forever, a kiss that sealed a love meant to last a lifetime. The next week, the grandest wedding Dubai had ever seen took place. The Al-Saif palace was adorned in gold and white, the air filled with the sound of traditional Arabian music and laughter. The world's wealthiest elite gathered, but Noor's eyes were on only one man, her husband, her love. As they exchanged vows, Rami's voice was steady, filled with devotion. You are my heart, he whispered as he slid the wedding band onto her finger. You are my forever. And when Noor spoke her vows, she made only one promise. I will never run again, she whispered, because my home is with you. Later that night, Noor stood on the private beach of the palace, watching the waves kiss the shore. She felt strong arms wrap around her from behind. Rami, her husband, her everything. Happy, he murmured, pressing a soft kiss to her shoulder. She smiled, leaning into him. More than I ever thought possible. He turned her to face him, tilting her chin up so she could see the raw emotion in his eyes. You gave me a family, Noor, he whispered. You gave me a second chance at life. Tears pricked her eyes. And you gave me something I never believed in, she murmured. You gave me love. Rami pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers. I will love you, he whispered, for every second of every day for the rest of my life. And then he kissed her under the stars, sealing a love that had defied all odds. 1 year later, the palace was alive with laughter and joy. Ayan ran through the halls, giggling as Rami chased after him. Come back here, troublemaker, Rami called, but his voice was full of pure happiness. Noor stood in the doorway watching the scene with a warm heart. Ayan was not only her son, he was Rami's son, and he was loved beyond measure. Suddenly Rami turned to Noor, his eyes narrowing. You're hiding something, he accused, crossing his arms. Noor laughed, shaking her head. I'm not hiding anything. Rami arched an eyebrow. Really? He stepped closer, his arms slipping around her waist. Then why do you look like you're about to tell me something big? She hesitated. Then, smiling softly, she whispered, Because I'm pregnant. Rami froze. His eyes widened. And then he lifted her into his arms, spinning her around, laughing with pure, unfiltered joy. Our family is growing, he whispered against her lips, his voice full of love. Noor smiled, cupping his face. Yes, my love, she whispered. Forever. And as Rami kissed her once more, under the same stars that had once witnessed their struggles, they both knew. This was their happily ever after, and it was only the beginning.